you interact with your client whom you suspect or you've observed that they have CPTSD is very, very important. When you're asking questions, because of how the brain has rewired that person, the questions you ask can cause more arousal of anxiety, and they can cause the person to go in a threatening environment. Somebody who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, their normal is very different from their general normal. Sometimes you will feel like you really want to help somebody, and the way you can come out questioning them can actually make them feel like they're being investigated. Religiosity slash spirituality. It can be a coping mechanism for somebody who's struggling with CPTSD. A coping mechanism meaning they're searching for meaning and they want to do things to make them feel worthy of the love of the deity that they believe they need to work towards. Thank you for joining me in another round of Understanding CPTSD. My name is Nyambura Gadombe. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist or a licensed systemic therapist. And yeah, it's going to be fun, I think, talking about this. And the whole idea is to spread scientific information so that we can be able to have transformative lives. So please share your questions. I'd like to hear about your experiences. I am particularly interested in learning if this is something that this topic, CPTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, if it's something that you've learned anything from this, ama mimi najiongelesha tu, or if it's something that is beneficial to you, please drop an email or a message. Please leave a nice comment. Emotionally, I'm very sensitive. Na mkiniambia forehead ni kubwa ndasikia vibaya hata kama ni kubwa. Sawa? Anyway, let's talk about CPTSD and certain aspects. So I will try and cover CPTSD. We'll start with understanding how somebody who has CPTSD looks at faith and religion or spirituality, understanding how they parent, if they are a parent, and understanding what you can do or what they can do or what we can do to support them. So first things first. So I want to start this episode by premising this, and this is specifically for therapists, counselors, psychologists, anybody who's within the mental health field, a professional mental health field. When you're evaluating for CPTSD or for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, how you interact with your client whom you suspect or you've observed that they have CPTSD is very, very important. When somebody is struggling or when somebody has underlying CPTSD that has not yet been diagnosed, and here we are talking about any client who comes to see you, this is not in any way in reference to my client. This is actually in reference to my own experience of CPTSD. When you're asking questions, because of how the brain has rewired that person to experience the world, and remember I mentioned in a previous episode that CPTSD rewires the brain because the brain is constantly on threat, which means your central nervous system is constantly on hypervigilance. The questions you ask can cause more arousal of anxiety, and they can cause the person to go in a threatening environment. So you need to be very careful with the sensitivity of the questions that you're asking. But what is most important is your presence as a therapist, in that you have to radiate two things. One, safety. A lot of reassurance on this might be difficult and it's okay. Whichever words you use, just make sure you're communicating safety. But not only communicating safety, make sure that you have the presence of safety. And then number two, freedom. A person who's struggling with CPTSD really needs to feel that they're in control. Because if they feel that they're not in control, the brain starts to see that as a threat. So this is really important for us who are in that mental health environment. And then the other thing you want to make sure, you need to understand this. Somebody who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, their normal is very different from the general normal of most people. So you, as a professional, it is your work to enter their world in normalcy, not to get them out of their world fast, is to witness their normalcy, appreciate it, accommodate it, acknowledge it, accept it, and commend it. And then you walk them slowly through safety out of that normal, because you want them to experience a whole new other normal. So I just wanted to premise that, because sometimes as therapists, and I guess I'm also guilty about this, is sometimes you will feel like you really want to help somebody, and the way you can come out questioning them can actually make them feel like they're being investigated. So I wanted to mention that. Now, the following information is for the general audiences. So let's talk about CPTSD and spirituality. And here I'm going to mention two. I will use the words religion and spirituality interchangeably because everybody has a different understanding of them. And I don't think it's fair we use my understanding. I want to accommodate everyone's understanding. So I'm going to use religion and spirituality interchangeably, however you choose to understand it. So, as we mentioned earlier, complex post-traumatic stress disorder rewires the brain. This means that the person's understanding of the supreme deity or the lack of that deity has been warped by CPTSD. And so just allow me to start with Christianity because that is what I am familiar with, and I apologize everybody else who's not a Christian who's watching this. Please forgive my ignorance. I'd like to learn, but I'm just like, my days are very, very short. But I'm also open to being taught. So if you have any materials, share them with me. So individuals who are Christians and they struggle with CPTSD will definitely struggle with the perception of God loving them. Remember, CPTSD affects the identity, as we mentioned earlier. And one of the things that really rip down the identity of a person who has CPTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder is toxic shame. Now, the definition of toxic shame is a very deep sense of belief that there's something inherently wrong with me and subsequently I don't deserve. So I'm going to define it again, and I'm going to layer it out how those intersect. Trauma, as we defined it, event that causes emotional experience. CPTSD is a trauma. But the difference between CPTSD and all the other kinds of trauma is that this person who has CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, was left to experience the emotional experience caused by the trauma over and over and over and over and over again. That is the toxic stress that we're talking about. Now, when this person is experiencing this trauma over and over again, they're internalizing these experiences. They're taking these experiences internally to them. That is what internalization means. And then they're believing that there's something wrong with them. That's why this bad thing keeps happening to them every other day. And the worst thing is that they're in the capacity of a small child. So they don't even have the cognitive understanding that this is not their fault. They blame themselves. If you want to understand that, there's a phenomenon in children, it's called egocentrism. Egocentrism is where the children believe that they are the center of the world. That's why for a young child, when they hit the chair, they say the chair has hit me. They feel like they're in control. It's their fault that everything around their world is happening. So this child has been exposed to chronic stress. Of course, this child is going to internalize that there's something wrong with them. And that is where toxic shame comes about, is a belief that there must be something wrong with me because this bad thing has happened to me again and again and again. The problem is most of us carry that toxic shame into adulthood, and toxic shame and complex CPTSD are intertwined together. So somebody who's experiencing CPTSD already has a deep sense of a belief that they are not worthy. Worthy of what? A good time, joy, happiness, suffering. And now that we are looking at it through an aspect of faith, somebody who has CPTSD will definitely struggle with an acceptance that God loves them as they are. Now, it is very common to find most people who join cults have some sense of trauma. So religiosity can actually, religiosity slash spirituality, it can be a coping mechanism for somebody who's struggling with CPTSD. A coping mechanism meaning they're searching for meaning and they want to do things to make them feel worthy of the love of the deity that they believe they need to work towards. Here, we see that CPTSD also affects the perception of somebody's faith and the perception of God's love. And maybe I want to talk to Christians specifically here, and for those of us who ascribe to faith in Christ Jesus. First, it's a gift, and thank God for that. Secondly, it is okay to struggle with that, even if you believe you claim to be a believer. Christ did not die for us because we were perfect people. Christ died for us because he loved us from eternity. Romans talks about that. And also, I want to encourage you to do one thing. If you find yourself that you're a Christian who struggles with CPTSD, don't try and clean yourself, then go to God. I once read somewhere or listened to somewhere that says, for us Christians, when we try to be good and then go to God, it's like you're trying to take a shower before you take a shower. So when ni mchafu, alafu unaenda kuchukua, you go wash yourself, then you're like, now I'm clean, now let me go wash myself. So you see how reductive it is. So I just want to encourage you, just go to Christ's feet. He's there to accept you as you are. For those others who are not Christians, I'm sure your various religions have certain things that you ascribe to. I am not in authority to talk about that because I don't know. Please forgive me. But the whole idea here is for us to understand that religion slash spirituality can actually be a behavior adaptation or a coping mechanism for somebody who's struggling with CPTSD. Now let's look at parenting. If you're a parent and you're struggling with CPTSD, and to be honest, and maybe here is where many people will throw stones at me, and that's okay. I don't say that in pride. I say that it's okay. I mean, we live in a very difficult world, so it's understandable. I'm not saying this with authority or with judgment. I generally think that most of our parents were really stressed. If you actually look at your family history, you'll be surprised to see that stress and depression were a key prevalent thing in our families. Now, why do I say that is the way we were parented, albeit in love, was also quite traumatic for most of us. There might have been extended periods of emotional neglect. Not that our parents wanted to emotionally neglect us. It's just the way the world is a broken world, unfortunately. Now, if you're a parent and you have been parented, you experienced that parenting in adverse experiences where there was a lot of emotional neglect and where there was a lot of verbal and physical abuse, it's no surprise that your brain has the blueprint of parenting as a very authoritative parent. So authoritative parents, you can see them when most say, I'm your mother, so you have to. Like there's no space for the child to actually communicate their own experiences. There's no space for that child to be a complete human being by themselves. That child is expected to do and be speak and spark on what the parent wants. And CPTSD can be observed through parenting where there's a lot of rigidity, where there's a lot of secrecy, a lot of things are not talked about, where there's a lot of shame, because remember, CPTSD knows GNAWS, knows the identity of somebody who has CPTSD by toxic shame. So if you're struggling with CPTSD and you find like you're also struggling with parenting, I just want to encourage you. It doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. It just means that your brain needs to relearn how to parent with a balance of love, but as well as discipline, because this is what your child needs. So once again, in parenting, CPTSD can show up in rigidity. It can show up in avoidance. It can show up in overcompensation, where you say, and I was this kind of parent to my son much earlier on, where you say, I don't ever want my child to go through what I went through. So you truly overcompensate because there's some element of shame. It can show up, I don't even mention emotional neglect. It can show up in emotional neglect. And what happens then, we are bringing up children who become parentified or who take up the role of parenting themselves. So maybe, could it be you're just not struggling with parenting? Could it be you're struggling with CPTSD? It would be good for you to try and seek further information. So we've talked about CPTSD and how it shows up in religion/spirituality. We've talked about CPTSD and how it shows up in parenting. So what do you do? Unfortunately, or fortunately, CPTSD is one of those psychological ailments that, depending on the intensity of the experiences, you will need at least two people in your corner. You'll either need a psychiatrist or you'll need a therapist, and you have to get a therapist who's trained in trauma interventions, like me and many others, or you need both. Because remember, your brain has been rewired, meaning your emotional health is not as what it ought to be. So you do, in most cases, you do need a psychiatric intervention, and that doesn't mean, Atina, you're being hospitalized, or that it doesn't come with stigma. You need a team so that the psychiatrist is able to take care of the brain and rewire it back by medication. And you need a therapist who is trained in trauma to help you come out of the hypervigilance, to help you learn how to gain safety, and so that you're able to live a life that is normal based on your new experiences of a normal world. There is still hope for having a normal life if you're struggling with CPTSD, but it's just one of those challenges that you have to go to therapy for. Thank you so much for being with me, and see you in the next episode. Bye.